This is Tabletop Babble, and I'm Amber. Hello! Today on the show, I chatted with RPG designer Craig Campbell of NerdBurger Games. We sat down on May 1st, and he shared his journey into writing and designing games with me, as well as a few of the games he's designed, including a bit about his new game, Norwhereville, a horror RPG set in a small town that won't let you leave, which it's currently live on Kickstarter. Hello, Craig, and welcome to Tabletop Babble. So, welcome to the show. For my listeners, would you please introduce yourself, your pronouns, and what you do in the TTRPG space?
Hi, yeah, I'm Craig Campbell, he, him pronouns, and I am a longtime gamer, GM. I've done a bunch of freelance for Wizards of the Coast, as well as a number of other companies to a lesser extent. And about 5 years ago, I established NerdBurger Games and have been designing my own games and publishing them because I'm a sucker. And I didn't want to just write for other people's games. I wanted to make up my own stuff. And the best way to get that into people's hands, at least I found for me, for my life situation, was to just become a publisher too, which is its own set of challenges. But yeah, I make all sorts of RPGs, little simple ones and larger ones, and lots of genres.
So I know you've been on the show before, and this is the first time that I've actually have had you on and am talking with you. So for me, I'm always interested in learning how people like truly got started in role-playing games. So for you, Craig, how did you come to be a gamer, as it were?
Well, in high school, I had a friend who said, "Hey, I've got this game, and it's about dragons and dungeons, and you roll dice." And he showed me the booklets and the little weird dice, and then he never mentioned it again, and we never played.
Oh, no.
And then when I got to college, I had another friend who said, "Hey, I've got this game that I think you'd really like, and it's got dragons and dungeons in it, and you roll these funny dice." And so I right toward the end of my freshman year, I played in a game of AD&D Second Edition. It was a Ravenloft game, and just one session, like before we headed out for the summer, and really just fell in love with it like immediately. I bought the books, and I just kind of consumed them over the summer. And then when I got back down there, I started gaming more regularly with that friend and friends of theirs, and it just kind of expanded out. And there came a point when I was in college, like for a few years there, where there was like the group of us all living in the same suite in the dormitory, where we're all gamers. And so we were like, if we weren't at classes, we were gaming, and there was a lot of gaming. And then life situations change, and you kind of moved to other games and other players and groups and all sorts of other things. But that's kind of where it started, was like I got the hardcore like gaming all the time in college for a few years.
I feel like that is definitely at least my experience too, where it's like in college when you're like 19, 20, you're doing classes and stuff, you have all that time, you could sit for like on the weekends 8-hour sessions.
Yeah.
And do hardcore gaming all weekend long. And that's kind of changes when you get older a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I don't have the time to absorb many, many, many games and many, many, many books. So I have to be a little more choosy. And like I read a lot of game books in those early years, where I had a little bit of disposable income. I spent it all on gaming, and I had the time to like really consume all of that stuff. When you get older and have more responsibilities, and you find just like it's harder to get together to game, it's harder to find the time to sit down and punch through a really heavy game book, a big thick one. And yeah, so you find your way, though. You find the things that you like and the ones that you want to focus on. And
taking your experiences from college and getting into gaming, doing hardcore gaming, for you, was there a certain thing about gaming that you were drawn to? Was it like, for instance, I'll give you an example, the storytelling or the mechanics or the lore in the games? Like, what for you was that?
I think that the thing that rung true for me, that was the idea of creating something from nothing in terms of a story, creating a character, being a GM and developing a story and guiding people through it. I went through a number of iterations of like trying, like I wrote poetry, and I tried writing short stories, and I wrote screenplays, and like all these different kind of creative outlets. And that's happened even, you know, from before gaming and then during gaming as well. But the one that really struck for me and really stuck and continues to be my outlet for creativity is gaming. So I think that was the play pretend and the belief that magic is real, and that there's like special things in the world that are like unique to, like, I can see this and understand this and I can share this with people. Like, I think that's always kind of been in me, and it was just like through gaming that it's mostly manifested.
I'm assuming at some point you've GM'd a campaign.
Oh, a few.
A few maybe. And so I feel like as I started GMing this past, it's been 3 years now, I'm feeling that that's where my writing is coming from. So for you, do you feel, what's a campaign that you GM'd where you're like, I got to really, like, I'm really jiving with this, like, creative writing and the story stuff that I'm presenting for the players?
Probably my most successful campaign. And it was a year and a half, maybe, something like that. It was longer than a year. I don't think it didn't break 2 years. Was Deadlands, original Deadlands by Pinnacle, before the Savage World stuff and everything. Like, so like go back to the 90s. That, and if you're not familiar with Deadlands, it's a Weird West role-playing game. It's kind of like, it's an alternate history of the Wild West, with monsters and magic and crazy, wacky steam tech, basically, that's powered by this fuel that it's called Ghost Rock, and it screams that like dead souls when it burns. And it had enough of the Western thing that I love, and camp and humor and horror, and I'm a huge horror fan, that it was like the perfect combination. And so that turned into a great campaign, because like one of the few times that I've done a save the world sort of campaign where like the characters were really out to make a significant impact on the game world. And by the end, ultimately they did, because we got to explore it as a campaign for long enough. And it was the right game, I think, for me to, you know, I never got bored with it. I never kind of got like, oh, we got to crunch through a little bit more of this, which can happen sometimes with campaigns.
Yes, for sure. I've experienced that as well. So from that campaign and your gaming and GMing and everything, when did it occur to you, oh, I could write a game?
Well, it happened very slowly. A friend of mine was an organizer for Living Greyhawk back in 1999, and I got a chance to write one adventure for the first year of Living Greyhawk, and you know, several years later, that friend was working at Paizo and was managing was working on the magazines, and so I wrote some stuff for the magazines. And eventually I just kind of, you know, met some people, and my name got passed around a little bit, and I started to write some things for the RPGA for convention adventures. And then there came a point in 2009 where I got laid off and suddenly had all this time in my hands. And I said, well, I'm going to tap into the handful of people that I know. And that's where the more concerted and focused freelancing started to happen during kind of the very tail end of 3rd edition and getting into 4th edition D&D. And I freelanced quite a lot during 4th edition. Came very close to actually contributing to a book, but did a lot of magazine stuff. And all the way from like little tiny articles, you know, 2-page articles, up to massive adventures in Dungeon magazine online. And just like kind of slowly built that whole skill set of you know, writing a lot of different types of things in a system that I was familiar with, so I didn't have to worry a lot about like inventing game mechanics, other than to kind of invent like the little subsets and, you know, subsystems and kind of hack systems to make things work for a, you know, an interesting moment in an adventure or something. And then that kind of built into, well, 4th edition was winding down. They weren't hiring freelancers to do stuff for the magazines as much because they were, as it turns out, internally playtesting 5th edition. So my freelancing kind of dried up, and then I said, I could try to make a game. And that's where we went. And it's that one, the first game, Murders and Acquisitions, got kickstarted. It got itself into the hands of some people, and I kind of haven't looked back.
My introduction to games and stuff didn't happen until 2000 and I want to say 10 is when I started actually playing 3.5 pretty consistently, and I have no idea about magazines. Like, there was a gaming magazine.
Yeah.
Showing my age a little bit here.
I have one article in a physical print Dragon magazine, and then everything after that was through Dragon Online and Dungeon Online, when Wizards of the Coast took the licenses back from Paizo that had been making the physical magazines during the 3rd edition era, and they made it into an online magazine, both of them. And that's, like Paizo losing the license to make those physical magazines is in part what led to Pathfinder, because suddenly their revenue stream dried up.
Yeah,
because they were selling magazines. That was kind of who Paizo was for the most part. They did a bunch of accessories and things too, and adventure paths and things. But then they kind of shifted into Pathfinder after they lost the magazines.
Wow, it's interesting. Like, I mean, I see, of course, zines online, and there's some periodicals that come out that are digital, but I haven't seen a physical magazine unless I go to like Sam's Club or something and look at like cooking magazines and stuff. That's really cool. So what kind of stuff did you like write for these magazines? Like, what were kind of your features or articles?
Well, I wrote like a handful of things that were called like class act articles, which were like 1 or 2 page, very short. Like, here's some options for this character class or this race. That was just, expanded material that came, and each of the magazines usually had like, shorter content, shorter articles, and then they had larger articles or adventures and so forth. And Dragon was kind of player focused, and Dungeon is primarily GM focused and mostly adventures. And I wrote adventures that were 5,000 words that took up a handful of pages, and then I wrote a 30,000 word adventure that takes like 60 pages in the magazine. So it varies, like like little kind of side trekky things all the way up to like, okay, here's an adventure that you could literally spend like a mini campaign just exploring everything that has to do with, in this case, Baba Yaga's dancing hut, going inside the hut and exploring every room. And there's a bunch of them.
I love that idea. Sorry, I'm like, a magazine, you say? What is all inside this magazine? Maybe I would like to make a magazine one day. My head, as if I need more projects in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, so going from the magazines and contributing to other publications, what was that step for you to be like, was it Murders and Acquisitions was your first,
right,
like, this game, this is me, I'm publishing? So can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Right. Well, that was just, an idea that actually came from a friend, and we bandied it back and forth a little bit. And I said, can I run with this and try to make it into a game? And he said, go for it. And I just, decided, okay, I'll design this game that's basically like, what happens if your character is like in the movie Office Space, or like, any other kind of office. It's really just office setting, but it's like cutthroat, over the top, tongue-in-cheek office setting where everybody's out for themselves, and it pokes fun at office culture. And I just created a kind of a very simple dice mechanic and built the character sheet to look like a resume, and kind of like let the humor just drive kind of what the game is about, where you're like, everybody who plays that game kind of gets the idea, like, oh, it's ridiculous, like, I'm gonna get into a fight and I'm gonna beat somebody to death with the red stapler, right? I'm gonna
yeah.
And I took a stab at it. I had a little bit of a following, maybe some social cachet with having done some freelancing, but not a lot. And I worked my butt off and advertised, got it out there, and got the Kickstarter going, and kept it kind of a simple. It's not a terribly robust game. It's got some optional rule stuff that kind of expanded out of stretch goals, and it's all black and white. And like, I kept the financial side of things kind of reasonable as far as producing it, and did it all with PDF and print on demand kind of stuff. And then, like, as I was kind of getting close to kickstarting Murders and Acquisitions, I realized like, okay, this is something that like, I feel like this is probably going to happen. Like I can bring this to fruition. And then so I started exploring other ideas. And then, over the course of the last few years, there's always like multiple games that are sometimes, very fully formed game things that are kind of in development, some that are just like I'm outlining, some that my ideas I'm just toying with, and they're all overlapping with each other. And it's just a question of kind of what makes it to the finish line and what makes it to the finish line first.
So when did NerdBurger itself become NerdBurger?
NerdBurger Games became NerdBurger Games. Oh boy, I want to say like the LLC. Like I called myself, I refer to myself as like Craig Campbell doing business as NerdBurger Games as of mergers and acquisitions. But I made it in a limited liability corporation shortly after M&A came out, because I figured, okay, well now I'm expecting to have multiple games here. I want to have like, it looks nice because it makes you look a little more official. It also puts you in a position of like, okay, I've got my money and I've got the company's money. And if anything were to ever happen legally and financial responsibility wise, like the company's money is where that is at, and people can't come after me.
Yeah.
And not that I would ever expect that to all be the situation, but I luckily live in a state where creating an LLC is relatively easy and relatively inexpensive. I feel very bad for anybody living in California who wants to start their own company and establish an LLC, because my understanding is they are crazy expensive to like yearly fees for an LLC in some states or some countries.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. When you started, was it with the success of Merger and Acquisitions that you're like, okay, this is viable, I should go forward with it, or were you already planning before, like, I'm going to try to make this my source of income?
Well, it was definitely with Mergers and Acquisitions being successful. For the record, this is all part-time.
Yeah, sure.
I have a day job and I'm very happy with my day job. I don't expect this to become full-time, the game design thing, but I thought like, I should firm it up. I should make it official at a certain point. And that starts to put, because now you put a name on it. NerdBurger Games starts to gain a reputation. You do what you can to support that reputation. You build a brand. You kind of figure out like, well, I would like to think that in the time that the company has been around, that not necessarily everybody in the RPG world knows, but there are going to be people who are fans of NerdBurger Games who would be able to tell you, if you ask them, what types of games does NerdBurger Games make? They'll be able to tell you. They know exactly what types of games. So, it was taking the step of making it, quote unquote, legitimate, like, treating it like the business entity and and treating it with an importance to me that I think it, behooved me to do.
Now you've got NerdBurger, you're taking it seriously, you're trying to build that brand up. What did that look like as far as like planning next steps? Was there like a I call it a conspiracy board of like, I got this idea. Like, how does somebody start to plan out? And for you specifically, how did you plan out what you were going to do next?
Well, it mostly, and throughout the company's, throughout the run of everything that I've done, it's been usually like the next thing is different from the last thing. It's still going to be kind of an indie level game. It's going to be something that's primarily designed by me, along with a number of talented freelancers who help to make the things and do the things that I can't do. But like I'm the chief operations officer, the chief financial officer, the chief technical officer. I'm the design lead. I'm the producer. So it's everything's kind of my vision, with great ideas brought in by others to augment that. And I think, it was just really just trying different things, creating different games. Like, hey, there's a game that, like, here's an idea that doesn't, it's sort of available in some games, or you could take this game and kind of hack it and twist it into that, but there's really not a game that does this thing, so I'm going to make it. And then it's just a question of like, you're working on them. And like I said, sometimes it's a question of what gets to the finish line first. Capers, which was the second game after M&A, made it to the finish line first, despite Die Laughing, which was the third game, having been that game started long before Murders and Acquisitions. Like designing Die Laughing, it took me 10 years to design that game because I kept trying different approaches and I never quite hit on the thing that made it really sing. And then when I had all this research in it, and eventually there came a point where I hit on this core conceit that made it really all fall into place, and then it all just came together in the course of just like a few months. It's like, oh, boom, there's a game.
Sleep a good 10 years worth of refreshing,
yeah.
and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and go, there it is.
Yeah, it was literally for that game. That's literally what it was. It was, for people who aren't aware, like Die Laughing is a horror comedy game where you portray characters in a horror comedy movie and you're going to die. So make it funny, make it memorable. And when your character dies, you become a producer on the movie and you continue to influence things, because I was always trying to solve the problem of, what do I do? Can I create a horror game where you kill characters and the players don't just make another character? Like, have the character's death be final. Like, this is it. Your character's dead. You're done. But they needed something else to do for the duration of the game. And I went through a lot of different ideas. And then when I it was literally hitting on the idea of, well, it's not just a horror story. You're playing a character in a movie, and there are other roles to fill when making a movie, and you become a producer. And when that hit me, like everything fell together, like puzzle blocks.
Sure. I love that concept so much. Like, I'm lighting up as you're talking to me about it. I'm like, I would love to play that game. That's such a fun premise. So what other games has NerdBurger produced since, when did it start and what it's been going on since?
Well, Capers was the second game, and then that got a bunch of supplements. Capers is superpowered gangsters in the 1920s. So kind of an alternate history of the American 1920s, but with like Lucky Luciano and Al Capone and other some historic characters, some fictional characters created for the game that are like, well, you're gangsters and you're doing the prohibition, bootlegging and gambling and racketeering and so forth, but you have like some level of superpower, like low level, street level superpowers. And then I did some supplements to go with that. That's, I would say, probably the flagship game. That's the one that people know the most. It's sold the most. It's got like a whole game line. And like the big thing after Die Laughing was Good Strong Hands, which I kickstarted last year and is very, very close to publication as we talk. By the time this comes out, it's probably available. So take a look around for that. And that was a game that is inspired by movies like The Never-Ending Story, Labyrinth, Legend, some of those like, kind of fun, don't take themselves too seriously 80s, like in 90s fantasy movies that have like a lot of whimsy to them, but also have this kind of strange darkness to them. I've taken to joking lately that the scene with Atreyu and Artax in the swamp in Neverending Story, and Amber just went, oh.
Yeah.
That scene affected me so much that 30 years later I made a game where you can save Artax. In the movie, your main the stand-in for your main character, because Bastian is your main character, but Atreyu is his stand-in, and so they're effectively the same character. Like the main character's best friend dies.
Yeah.
And I'm watching a movie as a little kid. I'm like, no, what are you doing? That doesn't happen. You can't kill the best friend. So I made a game later where it's kind of inspired by those types of movies and stories where there's the horrible void that's coming to destroy the world of Reverie, and you are out there to prevent that from happening and to stop, to save your world from being consumed by this nothing, as it might be called.
So we've got Murders and Acquisitions, Capers. Help me out here. What are your games again?
Die Laughing.
Die Laughing.
Good Strong Hands. I did a couple of little zine games back earlier this year and published them very, very quickly because they were small, so it was easy. Like, okay, I'll get an artist to do a few illustrations and I'll do the layout myself and get an editor. The one that really, I think, hit and did really well, it's like actually my most successful Kickstarter as far as number of backers, which was Low Stakes, which is inspired by What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, I love.
So you're playing vampires and werewolves and humans living in a house together, and you're really terrible at it. And the game is just built around creating tension between the characters in kind of classic sitcom trope story, archetypal stories, and then you're making checks in order to do you don't make dice checks for like everything that you want to do. Like mostly, like if you're a vampire and you want to fly or mesmerize somebody or turn into a mist, you just do it. Like you're a vampire, you do vampire things. But if you're an ancient vampire and want to try to use a computer, you're gonna have to roll some dice. If you're a vampire who's really, a character who's really old and really full of themselves, and you want to try to like engage with somebody on an emotional level and empathize with them, you're not very good at that because you as a monster, like that's not a thing that's in your wheelhouse. So there's you're mostly making checks about that sort of thing, and it's all built to just kind of culminate in whether or not the end of the story goes well for you or whether it goes poorly for you, and how you do on some of your checks will determine that.
I'm noticing a theme in your games where I feel like it's heavily inspired by these really fun, like contradictory premises where it's like, you're in office and you could hurt each other with a stapler or a water cooler or something. Or also like the same with What We Do in the Shadows. I love that concept of you're these powerful immortal beings, but you try to buy something on Amazon. You can't figure it out.
You can't buy something on Amazon. You can't have a reasonable discussion as a roommate meeting to divvy up the chores because nobody wants to do any of them because you're all ancient vampires and you used to have servants who did all of those things. And why would I do the dishes?
So I'm assuming it's fair to say that you get a lot of your inspiration from like the pop culture and media that you end up. Absolutely. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Josh, and I run an actual play podcast that I'd like you to check out. I'm using the Godbound system, and I create a sandbox-style game in a large city called Moxary. All of the player characters are evil, and I think that this really creates an interesting narrative because...
Nobody cares! I, Azrael, had to reconfigure reality to become the evil saint of Palor. Now I plan to overthrow the government of Moxary and amass followers. Then I will become...
You wouldn't know the first thing about reconfiguring reality. I did it, not you. I, Milana, want no part of your feeble plans. When my plan comes to fruition, all of Moxary will become my undead army, with them at my command.
They have to be dead before they become undead. I'm going to silence this entire city and prove myself. Prove Gerlach worthy of the goddess of the void.
No! Leave the monsters. I, Nuak Godslayer, will raise an army of monsters. They will overthrow our human leaders and live free. And I will be there.
Will all you quit your bickering and shut your faces? I, Brimstone, hear enough voices in my head without all of you talking over each other. All I want to do is kill the wizard Shalazar. It doesn't sound too difficult, does it?
If I have my way, it will be. Check out Tales from Moxary wherever you find your podcasts or geekspective.com.
This could kind of get into like what's the future for NerdBurger? Because I was like, what are some things that are inspiring you right now?
Well, right now the big one is there's a Kickstarter going on for Norwhereville, which is it uses the same game system as Good Strong Hands, so you have kind of character archetype playbooks with a bunch of interesting directions that you can take the character, but it's Norwhereville is the kind of my version of the quintessential Stephen King small town or the Twin Peaks small town, or like when X-Files would go to rural communities or small towns and have like a creepy weird monster episode. So it's a small town horror, both mundane and mystical and fantastic, with characters that have all of these. They might actually be monsters, like literally, like this person's a vampire, or that person can use can charm people and uses it to their advantage, or they might just be like really terrible people who hold a lot of grudges and cause problems for each other and blackmail each other in this town. And you can't leave the town. There's something mystical about the town that if you try to leave, your character becomes ill and it will kill you. So you are trapped in the town that is filled with horrors, both mundane and fantastic. And at some point, your character starts to remember that these things happen, because most of the people in the town don't. Like the town kind of like erases your memory. Like people forget that these terrible things happen. Your character and the other players' characters start to remember these things. And now what are you going to do?
I love that.
When you're the only agents of change in the town where you can't leave.
There was a movie, maybe you know this. I think Sam Neill was in it, and he was an author. Is this ringing any bells for you?
Oh, it's vaguely familiar.
I think about stuff also, like there was Alan Wake, that video game, where it's like this dark kind of, I don't know, town stuff. I love that kind of genre too. So this is beautiful. Norwhereville. I like that idea a lot. And is it like Die Laughing, where you kind of know there's not really a hope to change anything? Like, you know that you are this thing, or is there a way to, like you said, agents of change?
You are agents of change, and you can save people's lives and improve things in the town and defeat the monsters and foil plots. And there's mechanics in the game too for like finding a way to get other people and perhaps even yourself out of the town. You earn basically in the game, you earn impact points, which are ways, those are the ways that you impact the town and actually change the way things are. So as you earn those points, you can spend them on a variety of things. And, for example, one of the things you can do is you can literally save somebody and allow them to leave the town. Like we find a way to get this person out, and they can go and they don't get sick and they don't die, and you actually save a life long term. But then, the question becomes, who's worthy of that? Like everybody, like half the people in the town are victims, maybe more. And who you can't save everybody. So who do you save? So there's moral choices that happen all the time too, the game, because there's running on the assumption that your characters are going to do the right thing. You are the heroes in the story, but there's some hard choices that will have to be made, because sometimes, like I even describe it kind of in the GM section, where don't just have the monsters attack, but have the monsters do things that force the players to make decisions. The monster starts a fire in a building, you could chase the monster and end the threat, but people will die in the building. What do you do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love making hard decisions is a fun part of role-playing for me. So speaking of the GM section and the game itself, for a GM running this, is there a setting, or is there like a world building section that you get to make up with the players? Like how do you advise GMs to set up this town? The
town is written up. There's a map. There's locations of important buildings and institutions and so forth. There's a whole bunch of NPCs. There's a bunch of different monster information on different monsters, and then but it's put together in such a way that it's not definitive, because I want people to be able to, like, you could have players who could play the game multiple times, different campaigns, different one-shots with different GMs, or even with the same GM, and have a different experience, so that you don't want to have them learn the sheriff's secrets, and then like, okay, well, now every game we play, we know the sheriff's secrets, and the GM has to change the sheriff. I give you the tools to start doing that. So every NPC has 6 possible secrets that you can pick from, or roll a d6 and just select randomly. Or you can sometimes, some characters just don't have secrets. They're just people. And some of those secrets are, monster oriented, like the character is a vampire, or the character is, is a pyro. They're like, they can set fires. And then some of those secrets are things like, they got away with murder and buried a body somewhere. But it's just like, it's not because they were a monster. It's because they're a human person that did a monstrous thing. Or they're extorting somebody in the town. for power. And so as the characters kind of work their way through the story, they'll meet these NPCs and learn all these things about them. But then the next time they play, the GM could mix and match the secrets with all those NPC and kind of make a whole new town.
Awesome. So this will be kickstarting right now.
Mhm.
As you're listening to this show, this kickstarting right now. I want to know, as a publisher and just personally, have you found Kickstarter to be something that you'll continue to use, that you are happy with it? And so that's part one of my question. Okay, I'll hold off part two so that way we can focus on that.
Kickstarter is responsible for NerdBurger Games existing, at least in the way that it does. Like, I could design the games and I could put them on make a PDF and, just kind of do some interesting graphic things and sell them as PDFs. But to have artwork that really, is customized to the game and have something that evokes that, and having, a good editor go through things and proper graphic design and like really making a nice product and being able to, print on demand is a huge boon to the small publisher. The game exists, these games and the company exist in this way because of Kickstarter. It allows me to fund and find money to do all those things. Now, that said, I know I am in a privileged position on that. I am a white guy who doesn't have, I'm not married, I have no kids. I have a fair amount of disposable time, and Kickstarters and game design and publishing, for that matter, are time consuming. So I have the ability to do those things. Some people, Kickstarter might not be the right fit, or it might only be something they do occasionally, or they might keep things very small scale because they just don't have the time, or they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the spoons to deal with the hassle of all of it. There are other crowdfunding venues. There are people that do some really wonderful things with Patreon. That's a smaller scale kind of thing, but it's an ongoing thing because it motivates them. It's not Kickstarter all at once for this thing, but I've got these things that I like to make, and the Patreon just kind of allows me to kind of make sure I can hire an editor and make it like really cool. Maybe get a little artwork done, and it also, because it's an ongoing thing, it's useful to them because it kind of puts them on a deadline, like they're putting out a little something regularly. There's a lot of different ways to do it. For me personally, Kickstarter has worked very well.
Like you said earlier, like with the making an LLC, where it's like, depending on where you live, maybe you don't even have access to Kickstarter, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't use it. But if somebody were to have access to it, my part two question was, what advice would you give to somebody who has a game idea, they want to get it made, and they want to use Kickstarter? So what advice would you hand to that person?
Do you have an hour for me to talk? I know you.
Okay,
I know you don't.
Top three, maybe top two pieces of advice.
Sure. Top pieces of advice. First of all, do not be mistaken. Kickstarter is not going to do it for you. I know that you can find them everywhere. You can find Kickstarter projects that are like, oh, somebody got this thing, they put it up there, they didn't really try very hard on the page. It's clearly, they got like their 20 closest family and friends to back, and then the thing just kind of petered out and never went anywhere. Like, you have to bring a crowd to the crowdfunding. You can get funds, but you kind of have to get some people there on day one to give the Kickstarter a big jump and get in the public eye and show that it's real. Because as unfortunate as it is, as weird as it sounds, Kickstarter backers want to back a sure thing. They are more likely to back something that is successful, that is already funded, than they are to back something that is even close to funding. You can have a Kickstarter that is literally $100 away from funding, and you will have a harder time finding backers than you will once you fund. Because it's a mentality. It's like, well, I might be throwing my money after nothing. This may never go anywhere. But as soon as they see it's done, it's like, boom, I'm on board. And, a big piece of advice too is Kickstarter's been around for a while. There is a lot of information, a lot of podcasts and streams and data, blogs, websites that talk all about how Kickstarters function. Research. I spent a year researching Kickstarter before I launched my first one. I got onto Kickstarter groups and went to forums where they were talking about Kickstarters in general and game Kickstarters in particular. And I absorbed everything I could. I backed Kickstarters that I could, and I paid very close attention to the updates. Don't back a Kickstarter and never read the updates. Read the updates, see how the thing is going, learn from that, and follow other Kickstarters, even if it's not something you're going to back. Like, keep an eye on some of the ones that you maybe don't back. Look for things that are in the scale of what you might be doing and see what they do. Kickstarter is a living, breathing thing. It's constantly changing. A lot of what you learn may not be useful 6 months from now, but a lot of it will be. There's a lot of truths that you can find just by doing the research. You'll find people saying a lot of the same things over and over.
So when you, Craig, are looking at Kickstarters to back, what is it that you look for when you're like, oh, I like this game. I want to back this game. This makes me feel, and not specifically maybe the game idea, but like literally about the Kickstarter.
I look for a project where the creator has clearly done the work. Like they've put together a Kickstarter page that is clear, that it gives you plenty of information. They've got at least some graphic elements or artwork. They've put a little bit of time up front to be like, this is kind of what the thing is going to look like. They've spent some time. They respond to comments. They're engaging. My Kickstarter backings tend to lean toward things that are very much like the stuff that I'm making, like small creators. I'm all for throwing money in the direction of the person who's just trying to make their dream happen more than I am throwing money at the big companies that are doing just fine. And so I tend to be more supportive of those types of things. But I will look for, specifically like, okay, does this person look like they did a little work? And it doesn't need to wow me. It just needs to be like, okay, once you get a sense of it, you can find projects where you're like, okay, this person, the Kickstarter page is like, if you scroll through it, it's like a page and a half of long. It's mostly text, and it doesn't hit on like 3 topics that you feel like a game Kickstarter should hit on. Like it doesn't tell you some things that you feel like, why aren't they talking about what system they're using? Even to the point of just saying, I created a custom system that uses D10s, like just that bit of information is helpful. But you can literally find Kickstarters where like, very basic information is missing. It's like, they tell me all about this world, but I don't know what the characters do. Tell me what the characters do. Tell me what I'm going to do when I play the game. As long as they've hit maybe 6 or 7 buttons that make a good, a Kickstarter page have like the information that needs to be there. And it's an interesting concept. And usually when it is a smaller creator, that's usually what I look for.
Yeah, I tend to see a lot of times bigger companies really just use Kickstarter as a marketing campaign, really. It's like, I know that you're going to make this product, but it's a way to like hype it up, because I think that people like being involved, right? Mm-hmm. And so I tend to look at small creators too. And to be fair to small creators out there who are looking to do Kickstarter is a marketing tool. Don't let anybody tell you differently. It is your best marketing tool. You can, if you spend the time on it, you can really get your idea out in front of a lot of people in that, 3-4 weeks that you do a Kickstarter. Sure, definitely. So you've got your Kickstarter going for Norwhereville. Is there anything else that we should know about, potentially ideas, hints that might be coming in the future that you are willing to share?
Oh boy. There's a number of things I know there are things that are on the docket that are potential down the road. It's like what happens first, what gets to the finish line first. I've got an idea for a game that is characters living inside of a computer simulated world inside the computer itself, right? It's Tron, but the computer is crashing likely for the last time. So it's Tron meets Mad Max. Like, what do you do when your world is about to end, but you're Tron people? And there's potential for some more capers stuff, because there's a whole a game line and a world that I've developed for that. I have an idea for kind of an end game for like, where does Capers end up in sort of a near future cyberpunk supers kind of thing that I'm toying around with. And I'm right now working with a friend of mine designing something. It is an RPG, but it is unlike anything that I have ever designed before in like a half a dozen ways. It's incredibly challenging, and that's all I'm going to say about that right now.
Okay. Color me intrigued. So Craig, if people want to find your work and everything that you do online, where can they do that?
There you can go to nerdburgergames.com, where I've got, like the whole rundown of a whole bunch of, each of the games is talked about there. There's some blog posts and things, and there's a store. The two, as a point of information, like all the games are available at DriveThruRPG. But I did offset print runs, like not print on demand, like actual printing press print runs for Capers and for Good Strong Hands. And those are both available on the store. That's the only place outside of like conventions or maybe the occasional game store that they get into that you can find it. You won't find those on DriveThruRPG. And for the record, those nice hardcovers that are, bound better and sturdier and everything are the same price as the hardcover on the print on demand. So why not get the book that's going to last a little bit longer and maybe has a little bit of extra stuff in it too sometimes. And I'm at NerdBurger Craig on Twitter. That's the best kind of social media place to engage me. I'm pretty active. I'm happy to respond to people there, talk, chat, get into game stuff, other stuff, horror movies, fantasy fiction, or like fantasy media in general, like rewatching some. I'm always rewatching TV shows and movies of things that I love. So I'm always kind of talking about some of that stuff too.
Thank you, Craig, so much for coming on the show. It was lovely chatting with you.
It was great talking to you. I'm glad we got a chance to meet. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. You can find me on Twitter at RocketOrca, Kenny as at Volfmir, and John is at CrosswaysGM. Tabletop Babble is part of the Geekspective Network. Go to geekspective.com to check out all our other shows or follow us on Twitter at Geekspective. Our theme music was provided by the Battle Bards.